Here's a few running backs that I'm going to consider sleepers going into your fantasy drafts over the next few weeks. So the first guy's Trey Sermon of the San Francisco 49ers. He might not be a super sleeper because they're ranking him as a guy going anywhere from the 5th to the 7th round in fantasy drafts. Well, you still got Raheem Mostert there. And Raheem Mostert's a guy I've talked about and mentioned in another video that he's a guy I'm not going to look to draft this season. Too many injuries under his belt. But when he plays, he's real explosive, no doubt about it. But San Francisco, they got Trey Sermon as a pretty high draft pick in the NFL draft for a reason. And this kid's explosive. He can make a lot of plays, and he can break out a lot of plays, and a decent wide receiver out of the backfield as well. So on the season, they're projecting 1,130 yards for Sermon here. 37 catches and 6 total touchdowns. He's got breakaway speed. He can make plays, and right here, him and Trey Lance, if both these guys start week 1 for this San Francisco 49er team, that's going to be a dynamic duo. And also to go with Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle, that's going to be an explosive offense if these two rookies go start week 1. And Sermon's a guy, I'm not going to have a problem to target him anywhere from the 6th to the 8th round. I think 4th or 5th round is a little risky with Raheem Mostert obviously still in the picture and still going to be a big part of this offense, unless obviously he goes down and he'll be out for some time. Then Trey Sermon, he's a top 3-round pick here for fantasy owners. But right now, I have him a little bit of as a sleeper, even though according to the rankings, he's not going to be a sleeper. But I think he could be a good sleeper pick in those middle rounds of your draft. And he could pay big dividends as a number 2 running back on your roster or a flex guy. The next running back I got as a sleeper is another rookie, Michael Carter of the New York Jets. So Carter, he's not as highly ranked coming into fantasy drafts or ADP'd into drafts like obviously here Trey Sermon. So Carter, he's going about 8th to 10th round in most fantasy leagues right now. And right here, there's not much competition. Let's be real here in this Jet backfield right now for Michael Carter. You got LaMichael Pirine back there. I don't think he'll pay big dividends. He'll be a backup after last season. He got a crack at a few starts in the backfield, him and Frank Gore. Obviously, Le'Veon Bell, he's gone. They released him. He went to Kansas City last season, and he just didn't show up at all, and still no one signed him. So I think this is Carter's job to lose. And he was a 3rd-round pick here of the New York Jets, and he's another dynamic guy. And they're projecting him 989 total yards, 37 catches, and 5 touchdowns going into the season. So this is a guy that definitely could pay dividends for this Jet offense. And this Jet offense, it's a pretty decent offense, I think, going into the season. You got Corey Davis and Crowder. You got Carter. You got Zach Wilson, the rookie quarterback, who obviously should be the starter week 1 here for the New York Football Jets. And we'll see what happens for Michael Carter. I think he could be a good flex to 4th running back on your fantasy team. And who knows, he could even break out and have a monster year in his rookie year. You just never know with these rookie wide receivers. But Carter, he's definitely a sleeper in my opinion, because he's a guy that'll be a 3rd or 4th running back season for your fantasy team, unless you totally just go all wide receivers and take this guy as a number 2 running back on your roster. But right now, I still have him as a sleeper at the position, but I think he could have a good year. The next running back's Damian Harris of the New England Patriots. I know they drafted Stevenson back there, but Bill Belichick rarely relies on rookie running backs. And Damian Harris, we saw flashes from him. The only thing with him is he can't catch balls out of the backfield. That's why they got James White over there still as the 3rd down back in New England. But Damian Harris, he'll be the short yard guy. He'll be the goal line guy. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him be a 10 to 12 point guy a week. He's a guy you'll get as your 3rd or 4th running back as well, depending the way your draft goes. And right now, he's going in about 7th, 8th round of your fantasy drafts. And I think he could be a guy that could definitely carve out a good role. He could even be a number 2 running back on your roster, and a guy you could be feeling comfortable about, because this offseason, the Patriots, they actually went out there and got a few weapons for this offense. And even though Julian Edelman retired, this offense is better off this season than it was last year. Damian Harris will even have a bigger role if Mac Jones somehow beats out Cam Newton for the starting job, but I don't see that happening in the early going of the season. So this guy, he could get a couple 100-yard games going. He could score a couple touchdowns, and he'll be the short yardage guy, like I mentioned, and not many people are paying attention to him, in my opinion, in fantasy drafts. So right here, I think Damian Harris could have a decent role in the Patriot offense once again, and he definitely could be a sleeper heading into drafts. The next sleeper is A.J. Dillon of the Green Bay Packers. So Dillon, he's going to be the backup now to Aaron Jones. And we saw Jamal Williams be a good backup for many seasons before he went to Detroit here in the offseason. So A.J. Dillon, he was an impressive guy. He was an impressive running back in college football. And last season, many people thought when Jones was out for a few games, he was going to take over, but that never came to fruition. But now as the main backup, and the way we see Green Bay use their running backs over the last few seasons, Dillon, he could be a flex option type of guy, and definitely a guy you target in the later rounds of your draft. He's going anywhere from the 9th to the 11th round in most drafts right now is Dillon. And if Jones ever went down with an injury, and he'll be the workhorse Dillon, this guy could put up top 15 or even top 10 running back numbers, especially in an offense with Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, obviously. So Dillon, I would target him as a later round back for my bench right now. And obviously, if you get Aaron Jones, you want to handcuff him with Dillon, who's one of the best handcuffs in all of fantasy football, in my opinion. And he's definitely a running back that could carve a rollout, or even just as a handcuff, is a guy that could pay big dividends as a sleeper going into your fantasy drafts. And the fifth and final sleeper I have going into fantasy drafts, Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. So Tony Pollard arguably was the more explosive running back in the Cowboys backfield last season over Ezekiel Elliott, who just looked slowed. He looked banged up, but according to the coaches and reports, Ezekiel Elliott, he's come into way better shape coming into training camp. And you could see it as well. He looks like Elliott of his rookie year, the way his body is. So right now, Tony Pollard, another guy who's one of the best backups and handcuffs to get in fantasy football. And he's going anywhere from the 11th to 12th round in most fantasy drafts going into the season here. So right here, he might be arguably a better wide receiver out of the backfield than Elliott. And they're going to use Pollard, I believe, 8 to 10 touches a game at least of the Cowboys. And reports have already come out that Mike McCarthy and this Cowboy offense, they don't want to tire out Zeke too much and give him 30, 35 carries a game. He's going to be more 20, 25 touches a game here. And this is where Tony Pollard comes in. And like I mentioned, we saw him break out and outperform Elliott in a few games last season. 435 rushing yards on 101 carries, 28 catches for 193 yards, and a touchdown. So Tony Pollard, he's definitely a guy for fantasy owners to keep in mind as a sleeper going into the fantasy drafts. So that's a few running backs I'm going to consider as sleepers going into fantasy drafts in the upcoming weeks